Welcome to The Debate. Today we're diving into Agatha Christie's The Secret of Chimneys and really grappling with one of its most intriguing characters, Anthony Cade. His actions throughout the novel are, well, they're complex, aren't they? They leave us pondering a pretty fundamental question. Was Anthony Cade's deep involvement in all the drama at Chimneys primarily driven by a noble pursuit of justice and duty? Or was it more about his inherent love for adventure and ultimately maybe some self-serving ambition?
Exactly. It's a classic Christie dilemma. It highlights how often our motivations can be tangled up, blurring those lines between the selfless and the self-interested. It's never quite black and white.
That's right. And I suppose my position is that Cade's actions, unconventional as they definitely are, were ultimately aimed at uncovering the truth and fulfilling, maybe reluctantly, a higher purpose.
Whereas I'll be contending that actually Cade's personal thrill-seeking, that instinct for rouse, as his friend calls it, and his eventual embrace of power were really his primary motivators all along.
Okay, well, let's get into it. So Anthony Cade, he starts off in the novel taking this seemingly, mundane job as a tour guide, a regrettable necessity for cash, as the text puts it. But almost immediately, he shows a commitment that goes far beyond just earning a paycheck. I mean, when Virginia Revel faces blackmail and then a man is murdered right there in her home, his protective instincts, they just kick in. He admits that calling the police his plan A would be the soundest option. Logically, yes. Yet, he chooses plan B, disposing of the body, concealing the evidence. Now, this isn't for his own benefit. The text makes it clear it's explicitly to protect Virginia from unpleasant publicity and potential incrimination. He's fully aware of the huge personal risk he's taking. To me, this reveals a kind of moral compass, one that prioritizes the welfare of someone he believes is innocent over strict legal adherence, especially when justice itself seems compromised by the situation.
Okay.
And then later, think about when he finally confides in Superintendent Battle about his role in the Staines affair. He doesn't just confess randomly. He does it with a purpose. He tells Battle quite directly, "In withholding this knowledge of mine, I was seriously cramping your style. You deserve to have access to all the facts." Now that demonstrates a clear shift, doesn't it, towards enabling the broader pursuit of justice once Virginia's immediate danger seems to have passed, and his eventual acceptance of the Herzegovinian throne. I mean, this is a role he once supposedly dismissed because of youthful democratic ideas, right? It's also framed not as pure ambition, but as a matured, maybe even cynical understanding of what's needed for governance. His powerful declaration to Battle, "It's a woman, it's always a woman, Battle. I do more than be a king for her sake." That firmly links his acceptance of this huge duty to his profound love for Virginia. It makes it feel much more like a sacrifice for her sake rather than just a self-serving power grab.
Right. Well, I come at it from a rather different angle. As I mentioned, Anthony Cade's entire journey, from my perspective, it isn't really so much about nobility. It's more about a man with what his friend Jimmy McGrath calls an absolute instinct for rose. Someone who thrives in and maybe genuinely enjoys the chaos he encounters. McGrath's early assessment that Anthony is sure to be in it sooner or later and has the 9 lives of a cat, that really sets the stage for his character, doesn't it?
It certainly paints a picture.
It does. And think about his reaction to the murder at Virginia's house. His primary response isn't really alarm or this immediate concern for justice. Instead, it's this almost eager enthusiasm for, quote, amateur detective work, and a desire to see if I couldn't conceal a crime with the necessary cunning. I mean, that speaks volumes, I think, about a thrill-seeking nature. Someone who views serious crimes almost as an exciting intellectual game. He explicitly tells Virginia, "Sorry? Good Lord, no. I love it. I've spent most of my life looking for trouble." He even describes his decision to dispose of the body as being driven by his private inclinations, which certainly suggests personal enjoyment, a kick out of the clandestine act itself. And his democratic ideas, well, they prove remarkably flexible, don't they? After rejecting his princely birthright for years, he ultimately embraces the crown for her Sakagya, and his justification, that cynical line, "Men don't want to be brothers. By judicious force you can coerce them into behaving more or less decently," feels much more like a rationalization for taking power, not some reluctant acceptance of duty. Virginia herself observes that he will enjoy being a king and has a natural aptitude for it. That strongly suggests this is actually a comfortable path for him, maybe one he previously avoided, but a path of power and adventure nonetheless. And let's not overlook his quick marriage to Virginia. Of course, it's presented as about love, but it also very conveniently secures his claim to the throne, reinforcing his position. That's a highly advantageous outcome.
Okay, you've certainly laid out a strong case for his adventurous spirit. And I definitely hear your interpretation of his initial reactions. But let's maybe dig a bit deeper into that instinct for Rose. Does it truly signify a deliberate search for trouble? I mean, while Anthony himself admits to loving trouble, couldn't this also be seen as, well, a heightened perception, an ability to sense underlying intrigue, hidden currents, rather than a desire to actively stir up conflict? He doesn't initially go looking for danger with the manuscript. He gets caught up in circumstances, right? He's just doing a job because of that regrettable necessity for cash. Then he genuinely stumbles upon a murder and blackmail. So his instinct might just signify an innate ability to navigate and resolve these complex, perilous situations. It could make him more of an accidental hero who rises to the occasion rather than a self-serving provocateur actively seeking out conflict.
It seems to me he's a man who finds trouble, maybe is drawn to it, but then masterfully deals with it, not one who deliberately goes out to create it. It feels like a common Christie trope, actually ordinary people or seemingly ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances.
I appreciate that alternative framing, I do, but I find it a bit difficult to fully square that with Jimmy McGrath's early and quite pointed assessment. McGrath doesn't just say Anthony finds trouble. He describes him as having an absolute instinct for Rose and says he's sure to be in it sooner or later. That phrasing strongly implies a kind of magnetic pull towards conflict, almost a fundamental character trait, wouldn't you say? And his willingness to travel under an assumed name, James McGrath, for that job, well, it already hints at a predisposition for unconventional, potentially risky undertakings. It sets him up, I think, for active engagement with chaos, not just passively observing it. He seems drawn to the trouble like a moth to a flame, and openly admits enjoying it. Isn't that a pretty clear sign of someone who genuinely relishes the high stakes and the sheer excitement of it all?
That's a compelling point about McGrath's framing. Okay, so while his natural inclination for intense situations is definitely part of his character, let's maybe turn our attention from his inherent tendencies to his more deliberate, strategic choices. You highlighted his elaborate deception to protect Virginia, but how does that action, which is clearly illegal, align with a genuine pursuit of justice?
Right. That's the crux of it for me.
Well, my argument is that Anthony's elaborate scheme, disposing of Giuseppe's body, coaching Virginia to feign ignorance, it was a deeply calculated act, but calculated to shield her unassailable position, from scandal. He was convinced of her innocence in the actual murder, right? So his overarching goal was preserving her reputation, her future. It's an ethical tightrope walk, absolutely, but his commitment seemed to be to her justice, preventing her from being unfairly dragged down. And crucially, as I mentioned, he later discloses his full involvement to battle. He explicitly acknowledges that, in withholding this knowledge, I was seriously cramping your style. That move, coming once Virginia's immediate vulnerability had passed, it clearly demonstrates an underlying commitment to the broader truth, to letting official justice take its course. So his actions, technically illegal, but focus on what he perceived as a greater good in that specific, messy situation. Protecting an innocent woman caught in a malicious setup. That points to a perhaps unconventional, but still a higher moral standard driving him.
That's a very generous reading, I'd say, but I'm not entirely persuaded. I'd contend that Anthony's own admission that his private inclinations urge him to dispose of the body coupled with his stated desire to see if I couldn't conceal a crime with the necessary cunning, well, that reveals a playful, almost immoral approach to a really grave situation. He's treating serious crime not as a tragedy, but as an intellectual puzzle, an opportunity for that amateur detective work he seems to crave. And his interactions with Battle throughout the investigation, playing that cat-and-mouse game, deliberately withholding critical information for quite a long time, like his knowledge of the Staines murder, it suggests he relishes the intellectual challenge, the thrill of outwitting the authorities, just as much as, if not maybe more than, a pure commitment to impartial justice. He even confesses to Battle, doesn't he?
I've a feeling that ever since I met you, you've been laying little traps for me. On the whole, I've managed to avoid falling into them, but the strain has been acute. Doesn't that sound exactly like someone enjoying the game, the sparring, more than simply pursuing the truth?
While he clearly does enjoy the intellectual challenge, I won't deny that. It's part of his character. Does that enjoyment necessarily negate his ultimate objective? Which, I still argue, remains the pursuit of truth and achieving a just outcome for those he cares about, primarily Virginia. But all right, let's shift focus again, maybe from these specific actions early on to his ultimate destiny. You argued earlier that his acceptance of the Herzoglichen throne was primarily an embrace of power and adventure. Can you maybe expand on why you see it that way?
Absolutely. His youthful democratic ideas, his explicit disbelief in royalty, they seem to just melt away with remarkable ease when the opportunity to become King Nicholas Oblovich presents itself. This isn't some slow, agonizing, reluctant acceptance. It feels like a fairly rapid pivot, wouldn't you agree?
It happens quickly, yes.
And his immediate marriage to Virginia, who just happens to be the daughter of an English peer, well, it conveniently strengthens his claim. It suggests a calculated, strategic embrace of power and privilege alongside any romance. He even makes that casual remark to Battle about kingship being rather fun, and Virginia herself observes he has a natural aptitude for it. All this implies a comfortable, almost preordained fit with the role, rather than some reluctant duty or a true sacrifice. He states he's always avoided regular work, and kingship is just a new job he's signing on for. That suggests it's simply another, much grander, adventure for him. To me, this points strongly towards a deeper drive for control, the excitement of leadership, and maybe a sense of belonging in that world of power and intrigue, much more than a selfless act for the good of Czechoslovakia, or even just for Virginia.
Okay, I hear your point about the expediency and his natural aptitude, but I would frame his evolution quite differently. His early democratic ideas, I think they were genuine, if perhaps somewhat naive, youthful stance. But his experiences, his travels around the world, they seem to lead him to a more pragmatic realization about human nature, maybe about the inherent need for strong, decisive leadership to maintain order. It's a cynical view, perhaps, but arguably an evolved one based on observation. His decision to accept the throne then can be seen as a mature, maybe resigned commitment to bring stability to a troubled Herzoglia. And that decision is undeniably deeply underpinned by his love for Virginia. He frames it as a sacrifice, famously stating, "It's a woman, it's always a woman battle. I do more than be a king for her sake." Now that doesn't sound like just personal gain or the thrill of power to me.
It suggests a weighty burden he accepts. Yes, partly for the woman he loves, but also, by extension, for the country she would help him lead. It shows a profound shift, I think, from pure individualistic adventure toward a sense of communal responsibility, however cynically expressed.
I understand the noble sentiment you're attributing to him there, particularly concerning Virginia. It's very romantic. But does that truly outweigh his obvious enjoyment of the game and all the strategic maneuvering? After all, he's a character who thrives on challenge. Let's just quickly consider his collaboration, or perhaps lack thereof, with Battle. You mentioned he effectively works in parallel with Battle, leading to a resolution. How do you see that playing out, given his often obstructive behavior?
Well, despite his unconventional and yes, often frustrating methods from Battle's perspective, Anthony absolutely works in parallel with him. And ultimately, his actions are instrumental in leading to the successful resolution of the whole Chimneys mystery. He plays his own game, certainly, but it's a game with a common goal: finding the truth, stopping the villains. He is crucial in unmasking Queen Varaga, who is Mademoiselle Brune, and recovering the Kohinoor diamond. His ability to piece together complex clues, like deciphering Richmond, demonstrates a sharp intellect that's deeply dedicated to solving the mystery. And that ultimately complements Battle's more official, methodical approach. He also expresses genuine respect for Battle's acumen later on, acknowledging that Battle wormed everything else out of me all right. That indicates a shared goal, and, despite their initial guardedness, a kind of mutual trust developing by the end. He provides Battle with crucial information precisely when it's most effective. So his role seems less about simple mischief and much more about an independent but ultimately aligned pursuit of truth.
That's an interesting way to put it, aligned pursuit. But I still find it hard to overlook how Anthony's interactions with Battle are so frequently characterized by deliberate obfuscation, misdirection, and just a clear enjoyment of the intellectual sparring. He acknowledges Battle has been laying little traps for him and that the strain has been acute in avoiding them. I mean, that isn't the behavior of someone solely committed to impartial justice, is it? His actions, like creating the dummy manuscript or using the books in the library decoy to trap Queen Varaga, they demonstrate a flair for the theatrical, a very clear personal satisfaction in outwitting others. He explicitly states that detective stories are mostly bunkum, but they amuse people, and they're useful sometimes. That implies a kind of detached enjoyment of the entire process, rather than a profound sense of duty driving him.
He seems less like a straightforward collaborator and much more like a rogue agent, expertly enjoying the chase and the intellectual chess match. He loves the puzzle, and the outcome, while just, feels almost secondary to the thrill of solving it his way.
But doesn't his successful navigation of that very chase and his ultimate commitment to revealing the truth, doesn't that demonstrate that his passion for the game actually serves a higher purpose in the end? He doesn't just enjoy the game. He plays to win, and he wins for the right side, for justice.
I would argue, though, that the right side often just happens to align perfectly with his own interests, and, perhaps most importantly, with the sheer thrill of that chase. His personal gratification seems to be the primary fuel, the engine driving him.
Yet he puts himself in considerable personal danger throughout, not just for the thrill, surely, but to protect Virginia and unravel a vast conspiracy involving murder and state secrets. That has to speak to something more than mere self-interest, wouldn't you say?
Danger that he openly admits to loving. Remember, he tells Virginia, I've spent most of my life looking for trouble, you know? He seems to thrive in these high-stakes environments where his supposed 9 lives can truly shine. It's his element.
And that passion, that element, I believe, is ultimately channeled into resolving injustice, not merely enjoying the chaos or creating it. This, to me, is Christie's masterful touch, showing how true heroes, or perhaps anti-heroes, can emerge from unconventional, even seemingly self-interested impulses.
A masterful touch indeed, but one that perhaps allows for, and maybe even invites, a more cynical reading of what truly drives her most compelling and often ambiguous characters.
Well, as we've explored today, the narrative of Anthony Cade in The Secret of Chimneys offers a truly rich tapestry for understanding human motivation. And it's probably why Christie's characters continue to resonate so deeply. On one hand, as we've discussed, you could see a figure who, despite an admitted penchant for excitement and maybe a youthful rejection of his birthright, demonstrates genuine protective instincts and an eventual willingness to shoulder significant responsibility, perhaps even seeing his royal role as a necessary, if unpalatable step towards order for a nation.
And on the other hand, as we've argued, you can view him as this shrewd adventurer, incredibly adept at navigating perilous situations, often for personal gain or romantic interest, who ultimately embraces a position of power that perfectly suits that instinct for Rose. His journey reflects a man finding his true calling, not in quiet duty perhaps, but in the thrilling, complex world of international intrigue and high-stakes games.
Absolutely. Anthony Cade's journey is compelling precisely because it allows for both interpretations, doesn't it? It blurs those lines between self-interest and selfless action. Christie really challenges us to consider that noble deeds can sometimes stem from deeply personal desires, and that perhaps in the messy reality of human nature, that's often how heroism, or effective action at least, manifests. So we leave it to you, our listeners, to consider the nuances of his character and decide for yourselves which impulse, which motivation ultimately held sway. The depths of The Secret of Chimneys certainly invite further reflection on how our chosen paths, whether driven by ambition or duty, or maybe a bit of both, truly shape our ultimate destinies.